Good evening. I meet a lot of people, and when I do, usually the first question I get asked is, so what brings you here? And it's always really difficult to answer depending on where I am at that moment. So I hem and I haw, and then they go, well, where are you from? What do you call home? Where do you call home? And that's even harder to answer since I have had such a crazy tornado of a life and have lived in 9 states. So it becomes a real difficult answer and makes me think, well, what is home? I was born in a small town, Pennsylvania, called Williamsport. You baseball fans will know it because it's the home of the Little League World Series. And I was adopted at birth by an older couple, and we moved 3 times before the age of 5, where we eventually settled in Erie, Pennsylvania. And my parents, neither one of them had any musical talent or training or anything, but my dad loved music, especially a big band, marching band, drum and bugle corps was his favorite. And he would take me to parades in Erie, 4th of July and everything. We'd go see drum and bugle corps shows. And at a certain point, he noticed that I would stomp, march, tap, bang, but in time with whatever music was being played at the time. So when I was 6 years old, my dad said, would you want to learn drums? And of course, I was like, yeah, of course. So my dad, being super cool, drove all around Erie to all the music stores asking if I could take lessons, and everybody told him no, that I was too young, come back in a couple of years. And we finally found a jazz drummer named Joe Matzak, and he changed my life. He told my dad, it's a little young, but you know what? Let's see what happens. And my dad said, that's all I'm asking for. And so, star pupil here, kept going. And that ended up sparking what has kept me rooted my entire life: music, drums, and learning, education. My dad and I, we would sit in front of the record player as I was listening to different bands with different drummers, and it was one of those big old-time, piece of furniture record players. And my parents, being from the silent generation, because they were older, my dad had a very progressive musical taste. And so we would sit and just listen, and we'd talk about what was going on, and it was really special. Throughout my childhood and all through high school, I played every type of drums I could play. I did musical dinner theater, jazz band, marching band. I did do drum corps for a season. I had an electronic new wave band because it was the mid-'80s. And another learning step that went into that was I really enjoyed the electronic technical element of it. I'd been playing drums now for 10 years at this point. And I love the idea that I could play these pads and these objects, and it didn't have to sound like a drum. It could sound like anything. I'm going to digress. So my band, we had a song called Puppy Love. And so I had a chip in a drum machine that had a dog bark sample. And I put it on a pad, so as we're singing the chorus, puppy love, arf, 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 and I would hit that, a little syncopated thing. Super cheesy, but really cool, too. So I did this all through high school. Now, I don't want to discount my formal education. I was one of those weird kids that loved going to school, and I loved my subjects, and I loved my teachers. I took a computer class in high school. It was Fortran punch cards. I really enjoyed it. And, my dad was always really big on education. He got his bachelor's degree at Kent State, and he got his master's degree right here at Michigan. So he was a big proponent of higher education, getting a degree, and all that. I did go to college. I went to Kent State as well, but I kept playing in new wave bands in Cleveland, which is right next to Kent. And the person I was playing with was Trent Reznor. And we were friends, and eventually one of those bands turned into what would become Nine Inch Nails. So, so at that point, I go back to Erie to pack up all my stuff to move to Cleveland because I had a decision to make, which was, do I stay in school or do I drop out of college and take a crack at being some sort of rock star? So I decided rock star. So when I went home, I had told my parents and to get all my stuff. And, I would say I moved out of the house. My dad would have said he threw me out of the house violently, But regardless, we, with a little bit of luck and a lot of hard work, Nine Inch Nails, we hit it big. And it was awesome. We got to play in front of thousands and thousands of people, including the super famous mud-covered Woodstock show in front of 300,000 people. We shared a stage with David Bowie. We ended up winning a Grammy for our performance at Woodstock. I got to tour the world for the first time and get paid for it. And at that point, home became the band, and home became my two 20-inch suitcases that I would, carry everywhere I went. And it was great. Eventually, Nine Inch Nails in 2020 would get inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so which was a huge honor. Huge honor. Nah. Thank you. But after about a decade or so of this, things changed. Things weren't as great as they were. The whole thing became toxic and poisonous, and although that band was my home, I had to make another decision whether to try to ride it out or move on for myself. And that was probably the hardest decision I had to make about where I was going to end up. And I ultimately decided to leave the band. And I moved back to Los Angeles, where I had lived for 2 years. Trent and I shared the famous Charles Manson house, Sharon Tate, when we did Downward Spiral. And I really liked LA, and that's where the industry was. So I moved back out there and had to reestablish home. I was by myself. My friends were the band. I had to reach out to people I had met. I had to meet new people. It taught me at that point that home is really like how you put yourself out there will determine what comes back to you. I know that may sound cliche, but it really is kind of true. And I've always tried to put my best out there for everybody and hope to get the same in return. Well, that panned out. I had an amazing decade-long solo career as a freelancer. I was a video game composer. I did Doom 3, Quake 4, a bunch of others. I was a record producer. I was a remix artist. I got to share the studio with the Smashing Pumpkins and Guns N' Roses and U2 and Hole and a bunch of other bands. I had my own band. I recorded under the moniker Tweaker, so I've released 4 albums under that moniker. And it was just an amazing time. Things were great. Until 2013. In 2013, I was set to do 2 tours. I was going to drum for a band I'd produced all their albums from Italy, and I was going to be keyboard player for an offshoot band by a good friend of mine from Slipknot, the metal band. Well, all of a sudden, one day, I feel a pop, and I'm like, uh-oh. Classic drummer injury, tore out my rotator cuff. Not drumming, I wasn't drumming at the time, but 40 years will do that to you. So I everything got canceled. I had to have surgery. Doctors told me, you're not touring. You can't play drums. You can't lift your carry-on. You're not going anywhere except PT for the next 9 to 12 months. And I got a little despondent, like, well, what am I going to do if I can't do that thing I love? And during that time, a friend of mine who was doing an after-school program for at-risk youth in Hollywood asked me if I would come in and talk about music, and they all had computers and GarageBand and things like that, and asked if I would come down and donate some time. And I immediately said, yeah, heck yeah. And it was the most rewarding experience, watching them light up and talk about music and creating things and learning how to create things like I had learned how to create things way back, and giving them something positive to offset the negativity that their lives, may have had at that point. It just felt right and natural. Well, that eventually led to a couple of small schools inviting me to campus to do a guest lecture or a guest teaching day, something like that. And anytime anybody would reach out and ask me, I immediately said, absolutely. You just get me there, and I'm there. And because I had worked with so many amazing people for so long, it really felt like it was my turn now to help that next generation. So I went and did all this stuff. That turned into a job offer to teach full-time at a small school in Wisconsin. So I talked with my partner, Melissa, very briefly, because we were both like, yeah, let's go. So we packed up everything in LA and moved cross country. And that's when I got into education. Well, so 35 years prior, if you remember, I dropped out of college. Yeah, so the first thing I get asked is, oh, we need all your transcripts. I'm like, what, my what? And they're like, your transcripts. I'm like, what are transcripts? And so I got a short waiver to be able to go back and finish my bachelor's degree. So I called Kent State, and lo and behold, it took them about a week, but they found my actual paper 1986 course catalog in a box, in a moldy basement, in a building, I don't even know, but it was great. And so I worked with their admissions and to pick the right courses I would need to finish up. So I did that, and it was so much fun to be back in that formal education itself. But that now allowed me to teach. But even though I had now become the teacher, I never really stopped being the student, whether it was learning from the awesome people I got to work with or going back to college, still a student. In 2020, I decided to go back to college again, and I got my master's degree. And that allowed me to teach even higher education. I really wanted to share my 35 years of experience with these young people. I wanted to tell them about the good, but even more so about the bad that can come along. And it's been super rewarding ever since that moment that I chose to do that. I have been to 49 states, still coming for Alaska someday. I have been to 38 countries that I've got to see, and this is the 9th state that I have lived in. So when I think about home and my own roots, it's me. Things swirl around, and you end up in all these places over so much time of your life, and the root is ultimately it's me. And I gained confidence and strength from that. And if my dad was still alive, he would shake his finger at me and just go, I told you you would need that college degree, And as usual, my dad was right. Thank you so much for letting me speak tonight. I appreciate it.